Hi. Today we're going to think about forgiveness. Now, forgiveness is a massive issue. It's a massive issue because of all the things that happen in the world today and the things that happen to us. And it's massive because it has huge implications for our well-being. We tend to think of forgiveness as being maybe for other people. We think about, isn't it amazing that that person managed to forgive that awful thing that happened to them? How could I ever forgive something like that? I could never forgive something like that. And that's something that I hear my patients say. I could never forgive. I could never forgive that person for the terrible thing. It was so horrendous. It caused so much pain. I could never forgive. Now, it's interesting because I think we actually don't fully understand always what forgiveness actually is, and we think that somehow it's letting the person who did the wrong thing off the hook. We think it's that somehow by holding on to the pain and the resentment that we're punishing them in some way, or that if we can just get angry enough or bitter enough, or so somehow that's going to harm the person, or carry or bring about some sort of benefit in some way. But it never does. It never does. It doesn't have any effect on the person that we're angry with, and it actually has really negative effects on us. And I think we think that somehow, that by forgiving someone that we're saying it didn't matter. And that's not true either. Of course it mattered. What they did was wrong, and it had huge implications often in our life and other people's lives. And that was wrong, and it did matter. But it still doesn't alter the fact that if we hold on to our stuff, if we hold on to the bitterness and the anger and the resentment and the grief and the sadness and all that goes with that as well, all those emotions and feelings, holding on to those isn't actually going to change anything. It's not going to change the event that happened. It's not going to change that person, and it's actually going to harm us. So I want to think through what forgiveness is and how it affects us, how if it affects us to forgive, and how we actually do it. What is it? What is forgiveness, and how do we do it, and what benefits does it have? So I remember learning, having a really impactful experience of forgiveness in 1987. And in 1987, it was on the news that there'd been the IRA bomb in Northern Ireland. It was a Remembrance Day bombing. And there was a man called Gordon Wilson, and he was injured in that bombing. And his daughter Marie, who was a nurse, was killed in the bombing. And within a few hours, Gordon was on the news, BBC News and national news, saying how he released the people that had done this. If he gave them, he didn't bear a grudge against them. Now that was a shocking thing. Within hours of your daughter being killed by a bomb as a deliberate act, he was able to stand there and say, I don't hold a grudge. And you think, well, that's shocking. That's amazing. Is that good? That's how can he do that? But that man, I mean, it must have been awful. He must have had such awful grief, awful trauma. And he didn't have a choice, did he? He didn't have a choice what happened that day. This thing happened and changed their family forever. But he had a choice what he did with his feelings, with the thing that he could control, the bit that he could control. So he couldn't control the thing that had happened, but he had a choice about what he did with his emotion, his feeling, his choices afterwards. And he chose to forgive. And Gordon Wilson then went on and he met with Sinn Féin and other leaders, and he became a peace campaigner. And the legacy of his life was one of speaking out in a completely different way about reconciliation and peace. And what an amazing legacy that is for that man. And it could have been so different. It could have been that he chose to focus in on the grief. Well, the grief, it's important to process grief, but he could focus in on the anger and the bitterness and the pain of what happened, and wanting revenge and focusing on that, and that is like a poison that that destroys. It destroys him. It doesn't destroy the bombers, but it destroys him. But instead, he made the choice to let that go and take a different course of action. And the result of that for him was that he was more at peace, and his life and his legacy were fruitful and productive, and helped millions of other people understand reconciliation in a different kind of way. So I felt that at the time that was such an amazing thing. It was a really profound moment. And since then, there have been many other people who've spoken publicly about forgiveness. And there's loads of research out there about forgiveness. There's so much information where with the proof that forgiveness actually is beneficial. It's beneficial for the person who's doing it. So when we're talking about forgiveness, we're talking about something that's actually good for us. It's not something that we're doing, with gritted teeth to prove something to somebody else. It's actually good for us. It actually benefits us. I'd like to just read you some of the physical things. We know that physical things get better when we forgive as well. So I just want to read you some of the physical things that get better when we forgive. So this is all in the research, and you can find information obviously on the internet, but these are the key physical things. So the better relationships, better mental health, improvement in mental health conditions, reduced blood pressure, a stronger immune system, less risk of heart attack, less pain, and increased self-esteem. Isn't that amazing? All those effects from choosing to forgive. And we'd pay a lot for that. We'd pay a lot for a pill that did those things, wouldn't we? So, forgiveness is worth considering. So what is it? What is forgiveness? Well, this is what psychologists would say forgiveness is. It's a conscious, deliberate decision to let go of our feelings. Conscious, deliberate decision to let go of our feelings. Our feelings of resentment, bitterness, and anger towards a person who has harmed us. We let go of our right of revenge. And it's not based on whether that person deserves it or not. Now that's massive, isn't it? It's not based on whether that person deserves it or not. So first of all, if we take what the psychologists are saying, it's a conscious, deliberate decision. I have to make a choice. And I have all these feelings, they're all there, but I'm making a choice with what I do with them. Do I keep hold of them, or am I going to let them go? And that's a choice that I have to make, and I will live with the consequences of the choice that I make. Then we have to remember that it's not actually about the person that we're forgiving. We think it is. We think that we'll forgive if they show enough remorse, or we'll forgive if they deserve it, or they've earned our trust again, or they feel bad enough about it, or say sorry enough, then maybe we'll forgive. But actually, it's not about them. It's actually about us. It's about our stuff. It's about the things that are inside us. And by waiting for that person to behave in a different way, which they may never do, that's out of our control, we're actually limiting ourselves. We're limiting the benefit for ourselves. So actually, it's not about whether they're remorseful or not. We're making a deliberate choice whether they are or whether they aren't. And we're making a deliberate choice whether they're sorry or not. And we're choosing to say, I can't get my own back. I can't make that wrong thing right. I can't do that. Nothing that I can do is going to make that wrong thing okay. But what I can do is take the effects of that wrong thing and choose what I do with it. And that's what forgiveness is about. I think a really good example of this is a friend of mine who was abused by her father. And she was learning about forgiveness. She was going through a process of healing and working through what had happened to her. And she came to a decision that she was going to forgive her father, which she did, for the sexual abuse and physical abuse that had happened to her. That's massive. So she chose to take those feelings, those resentful feelings, the angry, shameful, guilty feelings that had come because of that, and she released them. and forgave her father. But she also acknowledged that that what he did was wrong, and actually he was a risk to other children if she didn't do something about it. So at the same time as choosing to forgive him, she chose to tell the police what had happened. And the end result of that was that he was arrested and charged, because it was important that there were boundaries around his behaviour, and that, you know, other children were going to be safe. But the two things were separate. So she was able to do that, but at the same time choose to forgive, rather than doing that and then carrying all the pain and bitterness for the rest of her life, which destroys the rest of her life, not his. I think that's a really good example of where we're not saying this is right. We're not saying what happened was right. It was wrong. The bad things that happened were wrong and they matter. But this is about the choice with what we do with the effects of the things that happen. So what do we do? How do we actually forgive? I've had patients who've given some really good examples of this, actually. I remember one who she'd been working with a counsellor, and I think this had been a suggestion, but she got a really big helium balloon, and she wrote on it all the things that she was carrying inside, all the bitterness and anger and pain, and she wrote it all on the balloon, and then she released it up into the air. And for her, that was a symbolic moment of saying, that's it. I'm just releasing it up into the air. I'm releasing it. You can imagine it going up to God, can't you? Saying, this is, here it all is. Here's all the stuff. I'm just letting it go. I'm releasing it. I've had other patients who've chosen to write a letter, a really honest letter about what happened and how they felt about it. And the feelings are really important. It's really important to acknowledge the feelings that went with the events that happened. So they write the letter to the person and say how they felt about it. But then they say, I choose to release this all of this. And then I've had a patient who burnt the letter. I've had patients who actually sent the letter to an address that didn't exist. I've had somebody who gave the letter to a friend. It's really important not to keep the letter, because in a sense then you are holding on to it. It's about releasing in some sort of permanent way, so you can mark that as being the time when you let it go. Something that I did, now if you have a faith in God and you know Jesus died on the cross for all of it. He died on the cross for our freedom, for our sin. We've got sin as well. I've got sin. We've all got stuff in our lives that's wrong, haven't we? Even if it seems to be little things, it's still not right. So we've all got some gossip or pride or arrogance or lying or cheating or whatever. We've all got stuff there. And then there's all the other things that we think are the big things. Actually, they're all wrong things, aren't they, that we carry around with us. And Jesus died for all of that. He paid the price for all of that, so that we can be free, so that we can receive forgiveness from him. And he also took all the pain and the shame and the guilt and the dirt and the anger. He took all of it on the cross. So when you know Jesus and when you've turned your life over to him, you've actually said, actually, yeah, I'm receiving that gift of what you've done for me. I'm receiving that gift. Then you can actually give him stuff. So one thing that I did was to put all of it, imagine in my mind, putting it all in a box and then saying, Jesus, here it is. Here's the pain. Here's the guilt. Here's the dirt. Here's the resentment. Here's the anger. Here it all is. I'm giving it to you. And in your imagination or in your mind's eye, you can see that. You can actually see yourself giving that over to him, handing it on, and he takes it. I think maybe something important just to say there as well is that, forgiving ourselves is really important too. We can forget about that. But we can hold anger. We can feel, I think a lot of people feel this, feel bad about themselves. They've done something wrong, which we all do, and then they carry the guilt around, just like hanging a big rucksack on them that they carry around with them all the time, this guilt and shame and anger against themselves, resentment against themselves. And that too has physical effects in our bodies. There's a lot of research about the physical illnesses that can come from hating ourselves, being angry with ourselves, and things that then show themselves physically in our bodies. So forgiving ourselves is important too, and we maybe need to release a balloon for ourselves, or actually say, do you know, Jesus, thank you that you take all my stuff as well. You died for all my stuff. So I receive your forgiveness as a gift. I'm receiving that and I'm drawing the line, and now I'm clean. And that makes a massive difference to freedom in our lives. A really practical way to structure the forgiveness, whether you do it in a letter or on a balloon, or speak it out, is this order. So we say, I choose, I make that choice to forgive, and then name the person for very specifically what they did. So maybe I choose to forgive my brother for stealing money from my bank account. And the important bit next is to say how that made you feel, which made me feel stupid and betrayed and angry. And you keep going until you've listed all the things that made you feel. So I choose to forgive my brother for stealing my money, which made me feel angry, betrayed, stupid, and all the other things. And while I'm at it, I choose to forgive my brother for, and then you do the next thing and how that made you feel. And that's just I think that's a really helpful, practical way of structuring the speaking out and the release of all that emotion that's inside. And then once you've done that, it's really important not to go back to it. The temptation is, because again, last week we were talking about the pathways in our thinking and the paths that we go along and rewiring our thinking. And this is an area where we have to rewire. So when those thoughts start to come in again about anger and resentment and isn't it awful what they did, and yes, it's awful what they did, but I've chosen to forgive and let it go, so I'm not going there. I'm going to go down a different path. It might help you to have a look at last week's session just to help you with that. So it's really important not to go back to where you were before, and you've released it now. You're in a new place. And you're going to move forward from that place, and it's a deliberate choice, a daily deliberate choice to keep doing that. Share with a friend or somebody that you trust so that they can be on that journey with you, and having somebody alongside you doing that with you and helping you makes a really big difference too. You might want to do a bit of research and just have a look at what's out there. There's lots of things out there about forgiveness therapy and different models for how to forgive, and it's worth a look. I'll put a link on as well for something called the Forgiveness Project, which is in London, and that's really helpful. It's actually a site where there's lots of stories of where people have forgiven and the outcome of that as an encouragement for other people. And I'll put a link to some resources through Freedom in Christ Ministries that we're involved with as well. They've got some of the best teaching that I've ever heard on forgiveness, bit more detail than I've been able to go into today. So I'll put a link on there too. Now, I know as a doctor sitting across some patients for years and years and years that forgiveness is really, really important. I think it's probably one of the most important things that we think about and that we need to consider for our well-being, emotional, mental and physical well-being. So, it's really worth thinking about. It's really worth taking it seriously and looking at it and thinking about, and acting on making that choice to forgive.